The Sydney International Wine Competition is the only competition in the world where the wine is judged alongside food. The 2010 competition ran for 5 days in the World Heritage listed Blue Mountains, New South Wales, Australia.
I'm the chairman of judges for the show, have been for about the last 6 years, I think. The big advantage of this show is it's completely different to most of the other wine shows that are around in that it uses food as an aid to the judging process. So after the initial culling out of the wines, all the wines that are selected as the best 400 in the show are rejudged with food, and I think that gives a really different aspect to the wine and to the results. The aim is to highlight wines that are currently food friendly. It's a very consumer based show. The majority of wine shows in Australia and to some extent New Zealand are agricultural based. Their original purpose was to judge the wines and give feedback to the winery. So they're, like any agricultural based show, people put in their honey and their cakes and their, whatever they've done, and to win prizes, and it's feedback for the people that are making it. And that was the original concept of the agricultural based show. This show has always been set up as a show for the consumer, so it's a completely different approach to wine judging.
Most wine we know is consumed with food, and there's no doubt that the combination of flavours and textures have an appreciable difference on the wine, and some wines that don't particularly stand up well without food do exceptionally well as food wines. And so as an indicator for consumers who are going to be eating and drinking at the same time, it's probably the most relevant show that we have in the Australian system.
The tricky part is when you have to write the good tasting notes, and we're asked to dictate the tasting notes, and to really sort of make it very clear to any consumer that might be reading or hearing that tasting note, the fine differences between each of those wines, because you can see and smell them, but kind of sometimes finding new descriptors to say precisely what that wine smells and tastes of can be a little bit challenging, and that's where you get a little bit fatigued. But the tasting and the smelling itself isn't really an issue now.
Drink plenty of water. You tend to stand up, have a bit of a stretch just to change your mind. I've got a bit of a technique, because sometimes wines are quite monotonous. They taste similar. You just have a whole raft of 30 Chardonnays, and I get a teacup and fill it with tea bags or coffee, and just have a sniff of that, and it recalibrates your brain. So it just really keeps your mind alive. Other people sort of sniff their hand because they know what their body tastes like, and it just recalibrates your brain, which is a good technique. And certainly you've got to spit, but it's mentally tiring as well as physically.
That's one of the perils of a big wine tasting, is you swirl wine around your palate a lot just to make sure you can sense the tannins in the fruit, and the red wine sticks to your teeth, so you gotta get the toothbrush out a little bit later this evening. So and that's just one of the fun things about tasting a lot of wine is it's experiencing all the different flavors and different wine styles that you get a chance to see at one table. It's really great.
It's a lot more fun. It's the only wine show that I judge now. I have judged what you'd call more traditional wine show styles in the past, both in New Zealand and in Australia. And I've come to the conclusion that unless you're actively involved in winemaking, when it benefits you to be looking at young wines because it informs your thinking in putting together your own wines within the winery context, which, to be honest, is the point of the original show system, then unless you're doing that, it's an extremely arduous and not particularly rewarding process to judge wine in the regular show system, where here you're looking more at finished bottled wines, you're looking at wines in the context of food. It's an interesting week because it's kind of like a sabbatical week. You continue to work as well as tasting. You work through using internet and what have you, but you get your head into a different place, so you start to think more broadly about wine, its context, its role in the world, as well as the obvious, which is the role that it plays with food. So it's a fun show in that respect, and it's very rewarding to come and just spend a week and do that.
The judges aren't just Australian winemakers. They are international people, generally MWs, who come to wine from a different background to sort of winemakers and technical people. And I find that a complete pleasure, to judge with people like that. So we get all kinds of interpretations on wine and different opinions, and it's a great forum, I suppose, to look at wine.
Although we have roughly the same number of wines that we would normally be judging in a capital city show, the whole context is somewhat different because there's a broader range of wines, there's a broader range of producers sending the wines into the show, and I think that really opens up the whole thing. So as judges, we have to have a pretty broad perspective. We have to understand a broader range of wines than we normally would if we were just working within the Australian wine show system. And then, of course, once we start tasting the wines with food, then that puts it into a totally different but wholly reasonable perspective. Because, of course, we all tend to enjoy our wines with a bite of food, and this is a really great context to taste them in.